my God. Lucy, Lucy, can you hear me? It's Dad, baby, please. A father returns home at dawn to find his 8-year-old daughter frozen on the front steps, wrapped in a stranger's jacket, held by a homeless boy he's never seen before. The boy saved her life by staying through the coldest night of winter, sacrificing his own warmth until hypothermia nearly killed him. But when the father learns who this boy really is and where he came from, he'll face an impossible choice that will either destroy his carefully ordered world or transform it into something he never imagined possible. Welcome to Golden Heart Stories. This is the story of a night so cold it nearly took 2 lives, and one heart that refused to let go. The pre-dawn darkness hangs heavy over Rainvale Heights, where mansions sleep behind iron gates and security cameras blink red in the falling snow. It is 4:30 in the morning when Jonathan Pierce's black sedan climbs the winding road toward his estate, headlights cutting through the blizzard. He has been traveling for 16 hours, his mind dulled by jet lag and endless airport corridors. His fingers drum against the leather steering wheel as he thinks of tomorrow's prototype presentation, the investors who need convincing. The tires crunch over fresh powder as he pulls into the circular driveway. Through the windshield, snowflakes swirl like moths around the porch lights. He expects darkness and silence. Instead, something catches his eye on the front steps. 2 shapes huddled together beneath what appears to be a sheet of plastic. Jonathan kills the engine and steps out into the bitter cold. The wind slaps his face, stealing his breath. He moves closer, his expensive shoes sinking into the snow. The shapes become human, become children. His heart lurches violently. Lucy. The name tears from his throat, raw and desperate. She is there on the top step. Her small body wrapped in an oversized jacket, her blonde curls plastered against pale cheeks. And holding her is a boy Jonathan has never seen. A Hispanic teenager with dark hair and hollow cheeks. His lips tinged blue, his eyes half closed as if sleep and death are fighting for dominance. The boy's threadbare sweater offers no protection, and his jeans are soaked through with melted snow. Jonathan stumbles forward, his hands shaking as he reaches for his daughter. Her skin is ice when he touches her face, but there is breath, faint and shallow, misting in the frozen air. The boy's grip on Lucy loosens as Jonathan lifts her, and the teenager slumps sideways against the iron railing. His eyes flutter open for just a moment, unfocused and glassy, before closing again. Call 911. Someone call 911. Jonathan's voice cracks as he cradles Lucy against his chest, feeling how small she is, how fragile. He looks at the boy again, this stranger, who somehow ended up on his doorstep holding his daughter through a blizzard. Questions flood his mind, dark and immediate. How did this happen? Where was the security guard? Who is this boy? And why was he here? The sound of sirens begins to build in the distance, growing louder as emergency vehicles navigate the icy roads. Jonathan rocks Lucy gently, whispering her name over and over, willing warmth back into her tiny frame. The boy remains motionless beside them, his chest rising and falling in irregular rhythms. His fingers still curled as if holding someone close. Red and blue lights wash over the snow-covered lawn as paramedics rush up the steps with equipment and urgent voices. They work quickly, wrapping the children in thermal blankets, and checking vital signs with practiced hands. Jonathan cannot tear his eyes away from the boy's face, from the peaceful expression that seems at odds with near death. One paramedic lifts the teenager onto a stretcher, while another secures Lucy, and Jonathan follows them both toward the waiting ambulances. "Sir, do you know this boy?" A police officer appears at his elbow, notepad already open, pen poised. Jonathan looks at the stretcher being loaded into the ambulance, at the boy's hand dangling off the side, fingers still slightly curled. He realizes he does not know anything. Not the boy's name, not how he came to be here. Not why his daughter was outside in the coldest night of the year. The questions multiply in his mind, like fractures in ice, spreading outward in patterns he cannot yet understand. "No," Jonathan says finally, his voice barely audible over the idling engines. "I have no idea who he is." 24 hours earlier, the city wears a different face. Seattle's downtown core hums with afternoon traffic and the distant cry of seagulls over Elliott Bay, but beneath the Interstate 5 overpass, where concrete pillars rise like ancient columns and shadows pool in permanent twilight, Diego Morales is attempting to make himself invisible. He is 13 years old, though hunger and exhaustion have carved his features into something older, harder. His sleeping bag, salvaged from a dumpster behind a camping supply store, is rolled tight and tucked behind a support beam. Along with everything else he owns in this world. A backpack containing 2 shirts, 1 pair of socks, a water bottle, and his mother's rosary beads wrapped carefully in a plastic grocery bag to keep them dry. The underside of the bridge is a cathedral of sorts. Vast and echoing, where the thunder of passing vehicles overhead creates a constant rhythm that Diego has learned to sleep through. Other people drift in and out of this space, mostly men with weathered faces and eyes that look past rather than at you. And Diego has learned to stay quiet, to take up as little room as possible, to disappear into the margins where survival lives. His mother died 8 months ago. The memory sits in his chest like a stone he cannot dislodge. Lupita Morales, who cleaned office buildings at night and sang Mexican folk songs while cooking rice and beans in their studio apartment. Who braided friendship bracelets to sell at the Pike Place Market on weekends, who told him that people's hearts were still warm even when the world felt cold. She had been sick for a long time, her body failing in ways Diego was too young to fully understand. And when she finally slipped away in a hospice bed with Diego holding her hand, the state came for him within hours. The foster home was supposed to be temporary. That is what the social worker with the tired smile told him as she drove him to a house in the suburbs, where a couple named Frank and Melinda Carson took in children for the monthly checks. Diego lasted 3 months before he ran. 3 months of sleeping on a bare mattress in a basement room, of eating meals in silence. While Frank watched television and drank beer after beer, of Melinda's sharp voice cutting through the house like broken glass whenever Diego forgot to complete his chores exactly as instructed. Now he crouches near the bridge's western pillar. Picking through a plastic bag of discarded food he pulled from the dumpster behind a Vietnamese restaurant 2 blocks away. Half a banh mi sandwich, still wrapped, the bread only slightly stale. He eats slowly, making it last, and pulls the rosary from his pocket. The wooden beads are smooth and warm from being carried close to his body, and he runs them through his fingers the way his mother used to do while praying. You have to believe people's hearts are still warm, mijo, her voice echoes in his memory, soft and certain. Even when everything feels frozen. Especially then. Diego looks up at the underside of the bridge, at the graffiti tags. And the rust stains that bloom like flowers across the concrete, and he wonders if she was right. If somewhere in this city of rain and cold and indifference, there are still hearts that remember how to be warm. The thought feels fragile, like something that might shatter if he examines it too closely. So he tucks it away alongside the rosary and finishes his sandwich in silence, preparing for another night where survival is the only prayer that matters. The snow begins falling just after sunset, transforming Seattle into something softer, quieter. Diego has left the bridge earlier than usual, driven out by older men who claimed his corner. Now he walks the residential streets of Rainvale Heights, where houses grow larger with each block and security cameras watch from every corner. He is searching for the commercial dumpsters behind the shopping plaza where restaurants discard good food. His stomach has been empty since the sandwich hours ago, and the cold makes hunger sharper. He cuts through an alley parallel to the residential section, his breath coming out in white clouds, his thin jacket doing nothing against the wind. That is when he hears it. A sound so small and fragile it almost disappears beneath the whisper of falling snow. A child crying. Diego stops mid-step, his body going still. He has learned to be invisible on these streets, but this sound pulls at something deep inside him. He turns slowly, locating the source beyond the tall iron gate that separates the alley from the residential properties. Through the ornate bars, he can make out a massive house set back from the street, all dark windows, and there at the gate's edge stands a little girl. She cannot be more than 8 years old, wearing only a thin nightgown printed with stars, her small hands gripping the cold iron bars as she cries. Her blonde hair hangs loose around her shoulders, already dusted with snowflakes, and her bare feet are pressed against the frozen concrete. Diego's heart contracts painfully in his chest. Every instinct screams at him to keep walking, to disappear back into the shadows where he belongs. Getting involved means exposure, questions, police. The gate is locked, and climbing over it would make him a trespasser, an intruder, someone who does not belong in this world of mansions and security systems. He thinks of Frank Carson's house, of being dragged back there by authorities, of the basement room with its single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. But the girl's crying continues, small desperate sounds that seem to grow weaker with each passing moment. She sees him through the gate and her eyes widen with something between hope and fear. "Please," she says, her voice shaking with cold and tears. The door locked and nobody's coming. "I can't get back inside." Diego takes a step closer despite himself, his hands curling into fists inside his jacket pockets. He looks at the house, at the dark windows that suggest no one is home, then back at the child who is shivering so violently her teeth are chattering. "Where are your parents?" he asks, his voice rough from disuse. "Daddy's on a business trip," she whispers. "The security guard doesn't come until morning. I just wanted to see the stars." The snow is falling harder now, already beginning to accumulate on the ground, on the girl's hair, on her thin shoulders. Diego feels the weight of the choice pressing down on him like a physical thing. He could walk away right now, could pretend he never heard anything, could survive another night by staying invisible. That would be the smart choice, the safe choice. But his mother's voice echoes in his memory, clear and certain. "You have to believe people's hearts are still warm, mijo. Even when everything feels frozen." Diego reaches up and grips the iron gate, feeling the cold metal bite into his palms. The bars are spaced too narrowly for him to slip through, which means there is only one way to reach her. He looks at the girl one more time, at her frightened eyes and blue-tinged lips, and makes his decision. He begins to climb. The iron gate is taller than Diego expected, and his fingers slip twice on the snow-covered bars before he pulls himself over. He drops down on the other side, landing hard on his knees, and the girl rushes toward him with a cry of relief. Up close, she looks even younger, her lips tinged purple from cold, her body trembling in violent shudders. Diego moves quickly to the front door and pounds his fist against the heavy wood. The sound echoes hollow and empty, but no lights flicker on, no footsteps approach. He tries the handle, knowing it will be locked, and feels the resistance of expensive security hardware. "Daddy's in California," Lucy says again, her teeth chattering so hard she can barely form the words. The guard comes at 7 in the morning. Diego looks at his phone, the screen cracked but functional. It reads 11:42 at night. 7 hours until help arrives. 7 hours in temperatures dropping toward the teens, with snow now falling thick enough to obscure the street. He turns back to Lucy and sees the way she sways on her feet. Sees how her eyes are starting to glaze with that dangerous drowsiness that comes before hypothermia. His own jacket is threadbare denim, barely enough for normal nights, but he shrugs it off and wraps it around her small shoulders. The cold immediately bites into his arms, but Lucy stops shaking quite so violently. She looks up at him with confusion and gratitude. "You'll freeze," she whispers. Diego does not answer because they both know it is true. Instead, he scans the porch for anything that might provide shelter. Behind the house he spots garbage bins and finds a large recycling container with a heavy plastic tarp tucked beneath it. He pulls the tarp free and returns to the front steps where Lucy waits. Diego spreads the tarp across the top step, creating a barrier between them and the frozen stone, then gestures for Lucy to sit. She does, and he settles beside her, pulling the remaining tarp over both their heads like a makeshift tent. The plastic crinkles and rattles in the wind, but it blocks the worst of the snow and traps what little body heat they can generate. "Come closer," Diego says quietly, and when Lucy hesitates, he adds more gently, "We have to share warmth or we won't make it till morning." She shifts against his side, and he wraps his arm around her, feeling how small she is, how fragile. His mother's face flashes through his mind, the way she used to hold him when he was frightened. The way her embrace could make the world feel safe even when nothing else was. He cannot offer safety, not really, but he can offer this. Warmth. Presence. The refusal to let this child face the night alone. It's okay, he whispers, more to himself than to her, his voice already growing hoarse from the cold. You'll be warm now. Just stay close to me. Above them, the snow continues to fall in thick sheets, covering the world in white silence, erasing footprints and boundaries. Inside the tarp shelter, Diego feels his own body temperature. Dropping degree by degree, feels exhaustion pulling at the edges of his consciousness like dark water. But every time he starts to drift, he forces his eyes open and checks on Lucy, makes sure she is still breathing, still holding on. His mother's voice echoes through his mind like a prayer he cannot stop repeating. People's hearts are still warm, even when everything feels frozen. Especially then. And so he stays. Time moves differently in the cold, stretching and contracting like something alive. Diego watches the minutes crawl past on his phone screen. It is 1:30 in the morning, and the temperature has dropped low enough that their breath creates small clouds even inside the tarp shelter. Lucy has stopped shivering, which Diego knows from his nights on the street is not a good sign. He pulls her closer, rubbing her arms through his jacket to generate warmth. I wanted to see the stars, Lucy whispers suddenly, her voice small and distant. That's why I went outside. But the clouds came. Tears begin to slide down her cheeks, leaving wet tracks that glisten in the faint light from the street lamps. Diego feels something crack open inside his chest at the sight of her crying. He thinks of his mother, of the way she could transform darkness into something magical. Then we'll make our own stars, Diego says, his words slightly slurred as the cold affects his speech. He fumbles in his pocket with numb fingers and pulls out his phone, switching on the flashlight. The beam cuts through the darkness inside their tent, and he holds it up against the plastic tarp so the light diffuses. See, he says softly. That's the North Star, the one that always shows you the way home. Lucy stares at the light with wonder breaking through her tears. Diego moves the phone slightly, creating another point of brightness. And that one is Sirius. The brightest star in the sky. My mom used to tell me it was the star of loyalty, because it never leaves the night sky. What happened to your mom? Lucy asks, her voice barely audible. Diego is quiet for a long moment, feeling the weight of that question settle over him like the snow settling on the tarp above their heads. She got sick, he finally says. But before she left, she told me something important. She said that people's hearts are still warm, even when everything around us feels frozen. She said I had to believe that. Lucy shifts against him, her small hand finding his free one and holding it tight. Do you believe it? Diego looks down at her, at this child he has known for less than 3 hours, this stranger whose life has become tangled with his. He thinks about the choice he made to climb that gate, about the jacket he gave her, about the way he has fought sleep and cold to keep her alive. He thinks about his mother's voice and the rosary beads in his pocket and the warmth that still exists beneath the pain. Yeah, he whispers, his throat tight with emotion. Yeah, I think I do. They talk through the darkest hours, sharing stories about their mothers, about loneliness and the strange ways that love appears unexpectedly. Lucy tells him about her father who is always traveling, always working. Diego tells her about sleeping under bridges and the way the city sounds different at night. Their voices grow softer as the cold seeps deeper, but they keep talking, keep holding on to each other, keep creating stars out of phone light and hope. At 3 in the morning, Diego feels his words beginning to stumble. His hands are shaking badly now, not from fear but from his body shutting down, conserving what little heat remains. He pulls Lucy even closer, wrapping both arms around her, turning his body into a shield against the wind. Stay awake, he mumbles, though he is not sure if he is talking to her or to himself. Just a little longer. But the cold is relentless, and despite his efforts, Diego feels his eyes growing heavy, his consciousness beginning to drift like snow in the wind. The last thing he is aware of before darkness takes him is Lucy's small heartbeat against his chest. And the thought that at least she is still warm, at least he kept his promise. Jonathan Pierce's car pulls into the driveway at 4:30 in the morning, headlights cutting through the darkness and falling snow. He is exhausted, his mind foggy with jet lag, thinking only of sleep. Then his headlights sweep across the front steps and he sees them. 2 small shapes huddled beneath what looks like plastic, motionless in the accumulating snow. His brain struggles to process what his eyes are showing him, and then recognition hits like a physical blow. Lucy. That is Lucy on the steps. Jonathan is out of the car before he fully registers moving, his shoes slipping on ice as he runs toward the house. His heart hammers against his ribs with such force it feels like his chest might crack. The shapes resolve into clarity. Lucy wrapped in an oversized jacket that does not belong to her, her face pale as paper, her eyes closed. And holding her is a teenage boy Jonathan has never seen. Lucy. The scream tears from his throat, raw and desperate, shattering the morning silence. He drops to his knees beside them, his hands shaking as he reaches for his daughter. Her skin is ice cold when he touches her cheek, but there is breath, faint and shallow, misting in the frozen air. Relief and terror collide inside him. The boy's grip on Lucy loosens as Jonathan lifts her, and the teenager slumps sideways against the railing. His eyes fluttering open briefly before closing again. His lips are blue, his face slack. Jonathan pulls Lucy against his chest, feeling how small she is, how close he came to losing her. But even as he holds his daughter, questions explode through his mind. Who is this boy? How did he get onto the property? Why was Lucy outside? Where was the security guard? Call 911. Jonathan shouts toward the street, his voice cracking. Someone call 911. He cradles Lucy against him, rocking her slightly, whispering her name. The boy remains slumped against the railing, and Jonathan forces himself to look at him properly. Hispanic, maybe 13 or 14, wearing threadbare soaked clothes. There is something about the way his arms are still slightly curved. As if holding someone even unconscious, that creates an uncomfortable tightness in Jonathan's chest. The sound of sirens builds in the distance. Red and blue lights begin to strobe across the snow-covered lawn, and paramedics rush up the steps with equipment and urgent voices. They work with efficiency, wrapping both children in thermal blankets, checking vital signs. This one's hypothermic, pulse is weak, a female paramedic says, gesturing to the boy. We need to warm him up immediately. Jonathan watches as they lift the boy onto a stretcher, as they secure Lucy on another. He follows them toward the waiting ambulances, his mind churning with confusion and anger and fear. A police officer appears at his elbow, notepad open. Sir, do you know this boy? The officer asks. Jonathan looks at the stretcher being loaded into the second ambulance, at the boy's hand dangling off the side, fingers still slightly curled. He realizes he knows nothing. Not the boy's name, not how he got here, not why Lucy was outside in the coldest night of the year. But something else registers too, something he does not want to acknowledge. The boy gave Lucy his jacket. The boy held her through the night. The boy might have saved her life. No, Jonathan says finally, his voice barely audible over the idling engines. I have no idea who he is. But even as he says it, as the ambulances pull away with sirens wailing, Jonathan cannot shake the image of those curved arms, that protective embrace. Cannot shake the uncomfortable feeling that there is more to this story than a simple break-in, and that perhaps his instinct to be suspicious is wrong. Detective Sofia Vega arrives at Seattle General Hospital 3 hours after the children are admitted, her badge clipped to her belt and a tablet under her arm. She is in her early 40s with sharp eyes and a reputation for seeing through surface explanations. The case file is thin: 2 children found hypothermic, one a wealthy man's daughter, the other an unidentified Hispanic teenager with no ID. The preliminary assessment suggests a potential break-in, but something about the scene photographs troubles Sophia. The way the boy's arms were positioned around the girl, the jacket wrapped around her, the makeshift shelter. These do not look like the actions of someone intending harm. She finds Jonathan Pierce in the waiting room, his expensive suit wrinkled from hours of sitting, his face haggard. When she introduces herself, he looks up with bloodshot eyes desperate for answers. Mr. Pierce, I need access to your home security recordings, Sophia says, settling into the chair beside him. They may help us understand what happened. 2 hours later, Sophia sits in a hospital conference room with the security footage loaded on her laptop and Jonathan beside her. The timestamp reads 10:47 in the evening. On screen, the exterior camera shows a teenage boy approaching the front gate, hesitating, then hearing something. A small figure appears on the other side of the bars. Lucy in her nightgown, crying. Jonathan leans forward, his breath catching as he watches his daughter grip the iron bars. The audio is faint but clear. Please, the door locked and nobody's coming. The boy stands there for 30 seconds, conflict playing across his face in the grainy footage. Then he begins to climb. The next segment shows the boy pounding on the front door, trying the handle. He removes his jacket and wraps it around Lucy. He disappears off camera and returns with a tarp, creates the shelter, pulls the girl close. Then, in a moment that makes Jonathan's hands clench, the boy holds up what appears to be a phone with its flashlight on. The audio picks up his voice, young and rough but infinitely gentle. See? That's the North Star. The one that always shows you the way home. Sophia watches Jonathan's face as he processes what he is seeing. Watches the suspicion drain away and something else take its place, something that looks like shame mixed with gratitude. On screen, the hours pass in accelerated playback. The boy never moves except to adjust the tarp, to pull Lucy closer when she shivers. At 3:17 in the morning, his movements become sluggish. By 3:45, he is barely moving. He stayed, Jonathan whispers, his voice breaking. He could have walked away. Sophia pauses the footage. Mr. Pierce, this boy climbed your gate knowing it was trespassing. He gave your daughter his only jacket in sub-freezing temperatures. He held her for over 4 hours, keeping her alive with his body heat. If he had chosen his own safety, your daughter would likely have died. The silence that follows is heavy. Jonathan stares at the frozen image on screen, at Lucy sleeping against the boy's chest. When he finally speaks, his voice is thick. Where is he now? He's in intensive care, Sophia says. Severe hypothermia, but the doctors think he'll recover. His name is Diego Morales. He's 13 years old, homeless, and he ran away from an abusive foster home 8 months ago. Jonathan closes his eyes, his jaw tightening. I told the police to investigate him. I assumed he was dangerous. You didn't know, Sophia says quietly. Now you do. She closes the laptop and stands, placing a hand on Jonathan's shoulder. That boy saved your daughter's life, Mr. Pierce. The question now is what you're going to do about it. Diego wakes 3 days later in a hospital bed surrounded by machines that beep and whir. His body feels heavy and distant, and his throat is raw from the breathing tube they removed that morning. A nurse checks his vitals and tells him he is lucky to be alive, that another hour in the cold would have been fatal. Diego does not feel lucky. He feels empty, uncertain what comes next. The social worker arrives that afternoon. Maria Chen carries a manila folder and an expression that suggests she has delivered bad news many times before. She sits beside his bed and explains that his legal guardians have been notified. Frank and Melinda Carson are claiming custody, asserting their right as his foster parents. Diego's hands clench beneath the blanket. The memory of that basement room crashes over him, the smell of mildew and Frank's heavy footsteps. He tries to speak but his voice comes out barely above a whisper. I can't go back there. Maria's expression softens with sympathy. I understand, Diego, but unless someone else petitions for custody, the court will likely return you to their care. 2 days later, the emergency custody hearing convenes in a courthouse conference room. Diego sits at a table wearing borrowed clothes, his public defender beside him. Across the room, Frank and Melinda Carson sit with their attorney, Frank's face set in concerned parental worry that makes Diego's stomach turn. Then the door opens and Jonathan Pierce walks in, flanked by a lawyer and detective Sofia Vega. Diego's breath catches. He has not seen the man since that morning, does not understand why he is here. The hearing proceeds with efficiency. The Carson's attorney speaks first, painting a picture of concerned foster parents. Frank nods along, his performance polished. Diego wants to scream, to tell everyone what that house was really like, but his voice feels trapped. Then Sofia Vega stands and produces a folder. She speaks in a calm, measured tone that somehow carries more weight than any shouting could. She presents evidence of past complaints filed against the Carson household by other foster children. Medical records showing injuries that were never properly explained, testimony from social workers who raised concerns that were dismissed. The evidence spreads across the table like an accusation that cannot be ignored. Frank's mask begins to crack, small fissures appearing around his eyes and mouth. Melinda stares at her hands. Jonathan's attorney rises next. Your Honor, Mr. Pierce is petitioning for emergency temporary custody of Diego Morales. He believes he owes this young man a debt that cannot be measured, and he wishes to provide a safe home while permanent arrangements are determined. The judge, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes, looks at Diego for a long moment. "Young man, do you understand what is being proposed?" Diego nods, not trusting his voice. "And is this something you would agree to?" He thinks of Luce's small hand in his, of the stars they made together in the darkness, of Jonathan's face in the security footage. Sophia showed him yesterday, the way his expression transformed from anger to understanding. He thinks of his mother's voice telling him that hearts are still warm even when everything feels frozen. "Yes," Diego says, his voice gaining strength. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge studies the evidence, the testimonies, the faces around the room. When she speaks, her voice is firm and final. "I am placing Diego Morales in the temporary custody of Jonathan Pierce pending a full review. The Carson petition is denied, and I am referring their case for investigation. We are adjourned." The gavel falls, and Diego feels something shift inside him, like ice beginning to thaw. 6 months pass like pages turning in a book Diego never knew he was writing. The house on Rainvale Heights has become something he still cannot quite believe is real. His room is on the 2nd floor with windows facing east, catching morning light, and there is a desk for homework and a closet full of clothes that fit. But more than the physical space, there is something else he has found here, something harder to name but impossible to ignore. It is a Tuesday morning when Jonathan appears in the kitchen holding a small lunch bag, his tie slightly crooked and his expression uncertain. Diego sits at the breakfast table with Lucy, both eating cereal and comparing notes about a science project on photosynthesis. "I made you lunch," Jonathan says, his voice carrying hesitance that Diego recognizes as a man learning how to be a father in real time. "Turkey sandwich, apple slices, and those chips you like." Diego looks at the lunch bag, then at Jonathan's face, and something shifts in his chest. In 6 months, this is the first lunch Jonathan has made. The gesture feels enormous. "Thanks," Diego says quietly, taking the bag. Lucy grins. "You remembered the baked chips. That's Diego's favorite." Jonathan's expression softens, and for a moment he looks almost shy. "I've been paying attention," he says simply. Later that evening, after homework and dinner, Diego sits alone in the living room. The fireplace crackles with flames that cast dancing shadows, and he pulls his mother's rosary beads from his pocket. He has not looked at them in weeks, has not needed them the way he used to. But tonight, he holds them and remembers her voice telling him about warm hearts in a frozen world. "The warmth my mom talked about," Diego whispers to the empty room. This is what she meant. This feeling right here. The formal adoption hearing takes place on a Wednesday afternoon in the same courthouse where the emergency custody hearing occurred 6 months earlier, but this time the atmosphere is completely different. There are no opposing attorneys, no evidence of abuse to present, no battle to fight. There is only a judge reviewing paperwork, asking standard questions, and witnessing the transformation that has already occurred. Diego stands between Jonathan and Lucy, all three of them dressed in their best clothes. The judge asks if Diego understands what adoption means, if this is something he wants, and Diego's voice is steady and certain when he answers yes. She asks Jonathan if he is prepared to take on the legal and moral responsibility of raising this child as his own, and Jonathan's hand finds Diego's shoulder as he responds with a firmness that leaves no room for doubt. The gavel falls. Papers are signed. The legal system completes its work with efficiency and finality. They walk out of the courthouse together as a family that now exists on paper, as well as in practice, and the afternoon sun breaks through the clouds like a benediction. In the parking lot, Jonathan pauses and removes his coat, the expensive wool blend that he wears to important meetings and presentations. Without a word, he drapes it over Diego's shoulders, the weight of it settling like a promise kept, like a circle completed. Diego looks up at him, and Jonathan looks back. And no words are necessary because they both remember that frozen night when a different jacket changed everything. Lucy slips her hand into Diego's, and together the three of them walk toward the car, toward home, toward whatever comes next. In this story that began with cold and darkness but has somehow found its way to warmth and light. 7 years slide past like water finding its path downhill. Diego Morales stands at the front of a middle school classroom in the same Seattle district where he once slept under bridges. He is 20 years old now, having finished his teaching degree early through determination and second chances that changed everything. The afternoon sun streams through windows overlooking a playground where children chase each other, their laughter rising like steam. Diego has just finished teaching a lesson on To Kill a Mockingbird, discussing justice and compassion with 13-year-olds who understand the concepts academically, but have not yet lived long enough to truly know what it means to choose mercy over judgment. Students gather their backpacks and file toward the door in the usual chaos of dismissal. Diego watches them go with quiet satisfaction. The room empties until only one boy remains, sitting at his desk in the back row with his hands folded and his eyes fixed on the scarred wooden surface. Diego has noticed this student before. Marcus Rivera, 13 years old, quieter than the others, wearing the same hoodie. 3 days in a row and carrying a wariness that Diego recognizes like seeing his own reflection from the past. Marcus, Diego says gently, moving to sit on the edge of the desk beside him. Everything okay? The boy's shoulders tighten, a defensive posture Diego knows intimately. For a long moment, Marcus says nothing, weighing whether to lie or tell the truth, whether this teacher can be trusted. I'm in a foster home, Marcus finally says, his voice barely above a whisper. It's not good there. The words land in Diego's chest like stones dropping into water. He thinks of Frank Carson's basement, of sleeping under bridges, of the night he chose to climb a gate because a child was crying. He thinks of Jonathan's coat and Luce's hand and the way warmth returned to his life one small moment at a time. Diego leans forward, his expression open and honest. Then let's start by keeping you warm, he says. Marcus looks up, confusion and hope warring in his face. What do you mean? I mean that you're not alone, Diego says simply. I was in foster care too. I know what it feels like when the system fails you. But I also know that there are people who will help if you let them. Starting with me. He reaches into his desk and pulls out a granola bar and water, offering them with casual generosity. The boy takes them with trembling hands, and Diego sees the moment when Marcus's walls begin to crack, when trust starts to take root. I'm going to make some calls, Diego continues. We're going to figure this out together. You'll come to class tomorrow, and we'll take it one day at a time until things get better. Okay? Marcus nods, his throat working as he tries to swallow past emotion. Okay, Mr. Morales. Diego stands and walks to the door, turning back to look at the classroom that has become his purpose and his testimony. Above the doorframe, a small plaque reads Room 214 Mr. Morales, and below it hangs a photograph that Jonathan took last Christmas. Diego, Lucy, and Jonathan together in front of the fireplace. A family that began in the coldest night and grew into something unshakable. Marcus passes through the doorway into the hallway beyond. And Diego watches him go with the knowledge that this is just the beginning of whatever happens next for this boy. That sometimes staying, sometimes refusing to walk away even when it would be easier, is the only thing that separates survival from salvation. The final bell rings across the empty classroom, and in the settling quiet, Diego can almost hear his mother's voice like a benediction. Some nights never end. They just keep someone warm forever. And so he stays. Some nights change everything, not because someone left but because someone stayed. Has anyone ever stayed for you when life felt cold or lonely? Share that story in the comments. Your words might keep another heart warm tonight. Thank you for watching. This has been Golden Heart Stories.